sure that we get out to the group as well as we proceed through the series. Um, Today's session is really going to leverage the expertise of Susan Lieberman, who's one of the senior fellows with Attendance for a big national organization that's really leading the charge across the country. In this space, Susan brings lots of experience at the state and local level as she's engaged with school districts in the state, especially in the state of Maine. And our local spotlight is the incredible team at Colchester School District. Chelsea LaRoe serves as the school engagement clinician for the district, and Dr. Andrew Conforti is the principal at Colchester High School, and they're going to share some of their incredible work in this space. Just as a reminder, this is part of the Everyday Counts project, which over the last year has really brought together schools and healthcare providers in a number of communities. We also hosted a statewide summit in the fall, which I know a number of you attended, really trying to lift up some of this great work and building a ripple effect across the state. So thank you for being here. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Susan to get us started. We will have a very active chat, we hope, and lots of opportunity for participation throughout. So thanks for being with us. And Susan, I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you. And we definitely are looking forward to your interactive involvement with all of this discussion. So, really excited to have everyone here. So, if we could go on to the next slide, and we're going to be talking about student engagement strategies. But first, we'd like to know who's in the room. So, or in the virtual room. So please share in the chat your name, school or organization, and your role. So we would really appreciate. So welcome everyone, and please just in the chat share your name, school, organization, and your role. All right, next slide, because we like to know who's here. So thank you. Oh, look at this. Such a great range of people here from around the state. So glad to be here with you all. So I am going to do just a quick overview of chronic absence. A lot of you are familiar, but it's just to make sure that we kind of even out for those who are not part of the conference or the previous summit. So chronic absence is missing 10% or more of the school day for any reason. If you look at this, you're talking about excused, unexcused, or suspensions. Another way to think about it is excuse the known, the unknown with the unexcused, and suspensions is the behaviors. So those all fall under chronic absence and those students who are missing 10% more of school. This differs from just looking at the truancy, which is only the unexcused absence, oftentimes more with a punitive approach, legalistic approach, or average daily attendance. And with chronic absence, that's more of that positive whole student, whole community approach that we all value so much. Next slide. So oftentimes sporadic absences are more likely to go unnoticed. We often think about those students who might miss a week at a time, but too often, or more often, I should say, the chronic absence may occur sporadically. So just 2 days per month. And what that means is we're looking at students who miss 2 days per month. That's equivalent to 18 days of over a 9-month calendar, or it's almost equivalent to 1 month of learning loss. And that's what we're looking at, that accumulative. And I will say in Maine, we looked at our absences. And I was able, because I was involved with looking at that absences, we saw that the majority of absences occurred, even in the elementary school, were moderate, which means they only missed 2 to 3 days a month. And those same students, when we looked at their academic achievement, scored a year behind their peers, with the majority being missing only 2 to 3 days a month. And that was kindergarten to fifth grade. So I think we know that chronic absence really can have an impact on your academic and behavior and social outcomes. Next slide. And the idea is to start sooner than later. And I know it's now April and we're heading towards vacation, but it's still not too late to look at chronic absence in the school year. But it's also a chance to look at the beginning of the school year and what we need to plan for. So that if we're looking in a month's time that a student's missed 2 to 3 absences and we see that that pattern has occurred, that's a time to look at what we could be doing to address and look at the root cause and what is actually impacting that student's or those groups of students' absences. Next slide. So we have sort of a chat poll for you. Um, do you know the chronic absence rate in your school or community? Now, if you work in an organization, think about your home community. Do you know the chronic absence rate in your school or community? Just write in the chat, yes, no. What am I? So we have a mix. Thank you for your honest responses. Some of you do know, and some of you are not quite sure what it is. So here is something to think about. How do we find out? How do we know and learn what is the chronic absence rate in your school or community? Next slide. And what we also want you to reflect on is, do key people in your building and district know the chronic absence rate for the students you serve? It's really important. Just ask them. Do they know? And do people know how to access that data? So that's something to think about and who to actually look at. And thank you, David, for putting the dashboard on the chat. We really appreciate it. Next slide. So next, we're going to talk about that pathway for change. Oftentimes, people are asking us at Attendance Works or just anybody who's working with or about attendance is, what's the magic solution? What's that silver bullet? And there is no silver bullet. This is a sequence of steps. And I know in the last session, for those of you who attended that, Nick spoke a lot about the pathway for change. For those of you who are not as familiar, I'm going to do just kind of a brief overview. What we found is, because there's no silver bullet, if there was, you all wouldn't be here. We'd be working with the silver bullet and working on something else. But because we know that it requires a series of steps, that we really need to think about, what do we need to do first? And the first is that mindset. We're often thinking about attendance, whether it's excused or unexcused. If it's not working, we sometimes default to the punitive, legalistic approach. And sometimes that's because we feel like we tried all sorts of things, but yet it's not quite working. So we kind of default to that punitive approach. Or we think we can fix families. And this is about, how can we partner with families? How can we partner with staff to look at what's happening in school, what's happening in the community, what's happening with individual students, so that we can work together and approach things a little differently. Think about, how do I know? Do I know that family? Who knows the family? Who knows the students? How do we make a connection rather than we need to penalize that student? Then the next thing we need to look at is that actionable data. You just all spoke about or acknowledge whether you know or don't know the chronic absence data. We need to understand, what is the chronic absence data, as well as the different student groups that are impacted. So that could be by different student groups, or it could be by grades, just looking at the grades and seeing what's happening within the grades at your school. But we need to look at that so we can understand, which student groups are we going to focus? Where are we going to target some of our initial efforts? And then how can we expand that? We want to build capacity so that all staff, because we know that all staff can contribute. That is a major mindset change from, oh, it's Heidi's responsibility too. It's everybody in the school community, it's families, it's every community partners, it's everybody in the school community. How do we build their capacity so that they all know how to contribute? And then we can look at effective strategies. But if you're looking at a strategy and you have a negative mindset, you most likely won't have a positive impact. But once we look at that mindset, actionable data, build capacity and strategies, you're more apt to have those positive outcomes. Next slide. So, what does it mean when we talk about a mindset shift? Sometimes we go from blaming families. So, how do we build those asset-based relationships with families? How do we get to know families? Ask them the questions rather than blame them and inform them of what the problem is. First, talk to families and listen. Sometimes it's hard to do when you got 101 things to do in your plate and you want an answer really quickly. But if you take the step to listen, and that really can make a difference. Other times we often use one-way communication. That's letters to communicate about poor attendance. And we focus on those students who are tier 3. I'm sorry, we just do those letters. And I can tell you that I have sat with people and they said, I wrote a letter to the family and they didn't respond. So I wrote another letter to the family. They still didn't respond. I wrote a third letter to the family and I even bolded some of the words and that didn't help. Well, if the first couple of times didn't work, maybe you're not using an effective method. Maybe what we need to have is two-way communication. We need to share positive things. How do we promote those conversations early so we can understand what those barriers are and maybe address them again with community partners? And sometimes we also, I don't know what it is about educators, but we often go to the most difficult, complex situations. And that's not necessarily the best way, a best approach. It's to look at prevention and early intervention. Look at those students who've missed just 10 to 19%. But even more importantly, let's look at what preventative early intervention, what are we doing to welcome students in? And like I said before, instead of assigning one person in each school to address attendance, let's look at what does it mean to have everybody involved? Because all those people who interact with students can support this effort. Next slide. So, in a large group discussion, we often hear comments like, it's someone else's job, or the parents don't care, or the student is only absent a few days each month, or every year we talk about it, but nothing ever changes. Have you ever heard any of those?
Mhm.
So these are often comments we hear. So in the chat, share a response you can use to shift those conversations. So people can put that down in the chat, what you would, and I'm gonna, um, Chelsea and Andrew, I know you've been working on this in Colchester. What's a response you might use if somebody says, it's someone else's job or parents don't care?
I feel like it takes us back to early on in the process when you had that previous slide, starting with the mindset, looking at your data, and then understanding your capacity. I think this gets at the capacity piece, especially when it gets to the ultimate strategy of utilizing your teachers and maximizing your staff in order to address this as we did. We went back to capacity, and so there's the interest in it, and so that's where we started on a small scale. With people that were voicing concerns over that, bringing them to the table and partnering with early. And that's how we ended up just running out a pilot. So we
That's
certainly were used to hearing those things. So we brought those people to the table to kind of get everything on the table and then start to work together to address it.
And something else that we talk about a lot is that it's not just one person's job. It's not just like somebody else, like let's kick this over to someone else. It's all of our job. It's all of our responsibility to have these conversations and to work with families and students around attendance. So
And thank you so much. And I also love what Kim wrote. Sometimes it's easier to talk about the child or family than than who we are and what we do in our efforts to support attendance. So I love that self-reflection about what can we do to help support and building relationships and using and looking at policies, as Craig said. And Nathaniel, thank you so much about approaching families with more curiosity. What is it that we want to do and what makes your child smile? What what is your child motivates your child to go to school? Look at the positives. What helps them come in? And then when you build those relationships, you can start looking at those barriers. But the positive and starting with curiosity is such an important route to take. Thank you so much for everyone for your contributions there. Next slide. So this kind of is a segue to Andrew, what you were just talking about. So if Chelsea and Andrew can talk a little bit more.
Yeah, I think, it was evident for us around the country and then in our district that we needed to prioritize this. So one of the things we really talked about was the commitment in terms of if we're going to be leveling up and asking our teachers to do more, is dedicating more time toward this effort. And so that's something that we'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation. And again, partnering with a small group to kind of at least start to try something out to going back to that mindset piece and the capacity. Part of that is to build buy-in and show that this may be something worth your time, which is why, again, starting small with a smaller group with a pilot is one of the big recommendations that I have, because we were able then to use that data to kind of bring it to the larger staff as we went forward. And again, honoring teachers' voice in this day and age where our capacity and what we're asking of ourselves and each other is a lot. And so I think part of this is being transparent and really communicating, going back to some of those comments. In some cases, it's just like recognizing the elephant in the room and surfacing some problems that are unsolvable, maybe, but then shifting to a mindset, let's control what we can control, which is outreach. And as some people mentioned in the comments, approaching it with curiosity, and also building those relations and real connections, getting back to that as a way to entice people and make students feel seen and heard.
Yeah, so we needed to start somewhere. We knew that the numbers of chronic absenteeism were pretty, they were they were at numbers that we knew that we wanted to, we had to do something different. So that's where we started talking. And when I first started 4 years ago, I was like, let's just do this right away. Like, let's try this. But then I was like, wait, we actually had it goes in line with the mindset and the data and just slowing it down and being able to make something that could become more sustainable. So we're on year 4 and we're finally at the point where we went school wide with our trusted adult pilot. So it took about 4 years to get trust of the staff in the building, of administrators. I think that's in our next slide actually, but.
Are all really very helpful, and they're going to talk a little bit more about some of the specific work that they did, which was really had an impact. And David, I want to get to your question, but I'm going to fold that into what we're going to talk about next, which is the multi-tiered approach. So next slide. You're all familiar with this. We all work by this, understanding the multi-tiered system. And it starts with that tier foundational supports, the tier 1 for all students. And I'm going to go into the foundational supports in a minute. The tier 2, the early intervention, which is really students missing 10 to 19%. And then there's a tier 3, students missing 20% or more. If you notice, it's all additive. And so when you're on tier 3, we need to look back and say, what foundational supports are in place for these student or these groups of students? Or what tier 1 or tier 2 supports were effective and in place for these students before we jump to the more intensive supports that are part of the 20% or more. So, and what we're trying to do is how do we integrate what we already do, strengthen and build capacity of staff to do this. So I'm going to go into foundational supports more. Next slide. So at Attendance Works, we did some research with American Institute for Research, and we looked at what are the positive conditions for learning. What leads to students being engaged and attending regularly? And Heidi, if you can click on this 4 times, then I think everything will come up. Thank you. So we found these 4 positive conditions are really helpful. So physical and emotional health and safety. That's about healthy learning environments. It's about the way we welcome students. We talk about we don't want to add anything more to anybody's plate because everybody's filled to the brim in terms of what they can do. But how are we welcoming students, whether they're early, they're on time, or they're late? So when a student comes in late, do we say you're late? Because I've seen that happen in schools, and students just like know they've screwed up before they even walk through the classroom door with a note that says you're late. Or are we welcoming students by saying glad you're here, whether you're early, on time, or late? So instead of a tardy slip, think about welcome to school slip. Instead of saying you're late, how about a comment that just says, welcome to school. We're glad you're here. Hope to see you here earlier tomorrow. That's something that could happen in the main office when students come in, as well as what teachers can say. It doesn't add more to the plate. It just adds a sense that we want you here and you're belonging here. Do we have access to food and other basic needs? Some schools have a special discrete place for their food. So if a student needs it, they can quietly go into that space. However, everybody knows what that space is for, and everybody knows whoever goes in needs extra food. How about putting the food out where anybody can get it? We had a school where a coach actually went in and grabbed the food. Then all the players, many of whom needed the food, felt like it was okay to access that food because it was socially acceptable. And how do we do restorative circles, not just for tier 3, but also for just welcoming students. In high schools, I've seen it used for academic circles. What do you know about this subject? It sort of gives people a chance to talk about what they know about that subject. That sense of belonging. How do we understand, do students have a connection to other adults in the school? Do they have a connection to their peers? When we're talking about a student who has chronic absence, have we asked the question, do they have a connection to somebody? And then we look at academic challenges. I had a student tell me that she didn't come to school because she could either fail a test or come to or sleep at home. She chose to go take a nap at home than be a failure at school. So for her, she needed a smaller learning environment. She needed one where a teacher could help her and somebody who she was linked to. And once we figured out what the issue was, we were able to create it for her. And then for other students, they're bored because they're academically advanced. So how do we accommodate that? And it's something that we deal with every day. And then adult and student well-being. Are we checking in? Do you have a once a year yoga day for staff? Or is there something where we're showing gratitude to staff all year round? How do we do that? And how do we foster that sense of doing this? Now, and if you see at the center is relationships. Now, a lot of times when I ask people, what are the strategies you're doing that are learning? One thing I'll point out here, there is nothing in these words that talk about attendance or attendance incentives. They talk about how do we create an environment where we're supported, where staff are supported, where students and families are invited in. If people could put in the chat, what's something you do in your school that promotes positive conditions for learning? And we can learn from each other. So, and to look at, I'll respond to Randy in a minute. Monthly lunch with parents day. That's a way to bring in parents groups. Social emotional learning lunch groups. I greet students with a big smile and have a nice day. That's great. Can every staff do that? And that includes the custodian, the people who work in, free breakfast, snack and lunch, and afternoon snack. That's great. So even the student who's late can actually grab food. That's a nice way. And to welcome all kids by the name at the door. That's true if you're coming in late as well as on time. So these are great examples. Next slide. So students are connected at schools when they believe there's an adult at school who knows and cares about them. And so that's why it's really important to know which students have that connection, have a supportive peer group, engage in at least some of the time in activities they find meaningful, and feel seen, heard, and welcome in the school. Sometimes we know, those kids who are most connected, but what about those kids who are not connected? Those quiet students, those students who don't create any behavior issues. How do we make sure, especially if they're starting to become chronically absent, how do we make sure that they are seen and welcome? We'll hear more from Andrew and Chelsea about that. Next slide. And just really quickly, what do we know, and how do we know that students feel like they are connected? So does the trusted adult, does the adult that they have connection with, can name 3 strengths and interests a student has? Can they name 3 things about the student's life outside of the school? Do they know who the student turns to if they have a concern? And most importantly, have you expressed gratitude or positive message to the student? That's great. So I am going to read the slide. I'm going to read some of the questions. It's not always the student. Well, sometimes it's not in the student's control, understandably, but sometimes there are things we can do to help students enter school. Sometimes a bellyache is about fear of walking into the school, about that, how they're welcomed in the school. So we need to look at how do we build those relationships with students and families so that we can understand what the barriers are. We can assume we know, but we all know that assumptions are not the best way to go. It's really having those conversations to learn what's going on with the students. Next slide. All right, Chelsea, I think you want to talk about the intentional engagement in middle school.
Yeah, so in the middle school, we've decided that one of the social workers actually created this Cougar kudos card to have some intentional engagement with students and basically catch them like when they're doing something good or let them know that one of the school staff are proud of them, that they miss seeing them, thinking of them, and then they could write their own reason of why they think that that student is so awesome. And it's gone over pretty well. It helps with the connection to teachers, and I think that what happens is they leave those cards around in like the staff offices and in the classrooms so that at any point somebody can praise one of the students. And it's a great representation that like somebody noticed something that they did or noticed that they weren't there even.
Next slide.
Yes, so I'm having trouble hearing Susan, but like for us, I think, and for everybody, even based on your comments in the chat,
Right, guys.
is taking a holistic approach for our students and knowing that nothing's happening in a vacuum. And so like it's that the whole child and getting those fundamental needs. And so it goes back to our roadmap in connecting with Chelsea and kind of identifying that problem. I think for all of us in schools, like we're using Power School, and I think even still working out the kinks and knowing that everything's accurate and working with IT to kind of work through and see what's what. And for us at the high school, it's like, how are we counting? And ultimately we landed on like, how do you count a whole day? And we just said, you know what, 1 absence, 1 class, and we kind of went to there, and thinking, was it going to be 3 out of 5? Does that count as a full day? And so just having those conversations is a part of getting there. The building trust is both within your building and outside. I think that trusted adult, we're reaching out to families with compassion, like people have said in this chat, with curiosity. But we're in an environment where you have a governor that's telling people to fail budgets and that our schools are not successful. We're coming out of the pandemic where their value in education might be in a spectrum of things. And so like all of these things are part of why we went towards connection and reaching out and trying to go that direction. And then also in terms of strategies is the old way is not working. We met with the state's attorney so that we could go back to staff and say, we talked to the state's attorney about why these letters are not working and the fact that 16-year-olds they're going to do nothing with. And so that's not an avenue that's going to shame people into like sending kids in. And so like all these things are just different processes. And I think for all of us, it's going to be different whether your school size, what your capacity is, where you are at different spots. And that's why ultimately to get that buy-in and build that trust, that's how we ended up going to the pilot with people that were willing and able to try this out and show the value. And the other part about the data is it's hard for us to point to success in school. So anything that we can grasp at to really point at and say, yeah, I know you're feeling this way, but we need something to actually factually say whether it is or isn't. And that's actually something that's still playing out for us. And now we have 2 data points from our pilot and this year, and we still have people with mixed feelings as teachers and the people that we're asking to do this work, you know, and it's understandable. They are taking on a lot, and this does still feel like extra to our staff. We're not completely there.
And going back, so one of the big things that we did with the attendance committee that we formed was that in the earlier stages, so about 2.5 years ago, we, like Andrew said, we were talking about how can we move this forward? How will we get teacher buy-in? And the buy-in's the biggest piece, I think. And that's something obviously we're still working on, but the discussion that when we talked about this, a lot of it was like, it's going to be really hard to get everybody on board. So then we decided, let's have volunteers join a committee. So that we still run the attendance committee, and what we talk about in the committee feeds how we envision moving forward for next year even. And so then after the committee, we came up with the idea of the trusted adult vision, knowing that engagement is the biggest piece and relationships within the school. So that's when we came back to the drawing board and talked about it. And that's when we started doing the presentations to staff and faculty on what is the trusted adult model. How can we support teachers in calling home every time a student misses a day? And then we asked for volunteers to participate in the pilot last year. And so we found success with that. And then that's when we started the Trusted Adult pilot this year school-wide. So that's sort of the process of how it was a slow process, but it's worth taking your time to get everything in line before you move on. Next slide. Yeah. Next slide, please.
Yeah, and like the Andrew's last piece about parents and helping to support them, one going with some curiosity, and that feels like a lot out of our control. We can't control the messaging outside of this building. So that's like, what is our messaging? Where is our efforts? And again, it's more than just attendance and other pieces. So there was a lot of great ideas in terms of community and family engagement. That's ultimately what we're getting at. And so this isn't an isolation. There certainly are other things, like just for instance, this week we're talking about how do we redesign open house and all of these things that I'm sure other people are seeing, dwindling engagement, less teachers showing up to co-curricular and athletic events. I bet everybody's seeing less engagement across the board, even within your school, and the behaviors of your teachers and your communities. People are, as we know, like are increasingly isolated, feeling isolated. And again, that's how we ended up, how do we build trust? Like we're designing, it's like forced family fun when we do with our staff. Like we have to behave and act in a way that reflects our values. And that's what this strategy is designed to do.
And parent buy-in is huge. So one of the big things we worked on early on, and we still do it every time we do the professional development that focuses on trusted adult, is how are we talking to parents when we call home? Are we we let them know, information, but are we pulling them in as well, trying to engage them? And so most of the time when people refer students who are chronically absent to me, one of the first things that we talk about, and what I do, is try to have them come into the school for a meeting so that we can all talk about it with all of and this is district wide, not just at the high school for me. I was a former child protection worker. So one of the biggest things I always found was that when you go out into a home, a lot of times there's questions about the school, and then the school has questions about the parents. So the best way to do it is to get everybody together and make a plan how we all move forward. And so that's something that we do pretty frequently. So for this pilot, the attendance committee that we had, and we still have this still rings true this year, is that we always have an administrator, athletic coaches. So this is just naturally happens. Like a lot of some of the teachers are athletic coaches, but we tried to have a range of people. So district school engagement clinician is me, public health specialist, Jess LeClaire from the Department of Health sits in on our committee. School counselors, school nurses, school social workers, special education, case managers, teachers, and union members. So we tried to get a big group of just what is the right word? A mixture of different people to bring different things, essentially.
And a lot of those members have students in our district and also are elsewhere, so they're also bringing that parent lens, even though we don't have explicit parent representation, we have that lens very present as part of that.
The committee, so how often do you meet? Our committee meets, we meet once a month. But in our district, so another piece of this is in our district, each school building has an attendance team where we meet either, it sort of depends, but like as the kids get older, we meet bi-weekly. And then for the younger, the K through 2, we meet monthly. Next slide, please. Right, so the Trusted Adult Pilot Project, it's to build relationships so that we know that relationships and engagement go hand in hand. So students and families, schools through trusted adult relationship, right, to improve attendance. So when the staff participate, this is from when we were doing our pilot, but we're doing it this year as well. So we're giving training on messaging, how to talk to families, messaging going home, emails, like how, we ran through some scenarios of what if we call somebody and they're upset with us, or what if, they want to be more participatory in this. We crafted a couple scripts, and then we've sort of talked with different teams. Like when we have the teams, we'll go walk around and talk with people. And then support. So how to identify supports for the trusted adult and resources on engagement. So we're putting things out in the newsletter. We're talking, we're responding to emails when teachers have questions. What else are you using?
Yeah, and then the piece with them was just tracking and identifying the students, because talk about multi-tiered approach. Yes, like we're using Panorama just across the board in academic and social and emotional learning, but also for this to understand their history, historical attendance. And so early on is like, you have students that super like 60 absences, and that requires like case management, a lot of support, maybe not using that student, asking a teacher to be the trusted adult for there. So over time, just kind of more trying to identify through Panorama and data, students that might be on the fence, that are kind of pushing the limit, and that might be a little bit more reachable and feasible. And that has had a positive effect, because some of the students that are way out there are already getting a high level of support, whether it's either through student support services, case management, 504, and so on. So there's still a lot of those individual things that we attend to. Next slide. Yeah. Is this still staying in the pilot?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
well, I think even this.
And so like going forward, like, we were just saying, we had 17, and we'll get to some of the data. We had, 17 teachers participate in the pilot. But again, the idea was just to scale up and start small. Staff would have the opportunity to kind of talk about the barriers they face with each other, and then we just kind of support that on the back end. I think also relative to what we did, somebody had asked about, like, were you able to take anything off the plate of teachers? Not necessarily. What we did do, though, is in our professional learning calendar and time, build in time for this, both for us as an opportunity to kind of present new information, maybe global data, strategies, and those pieces. But more than that is like to do a check-in and say, hey, now take some time, look at your student, maybe make a phone call, make an email, come see us. And so just building time in that I had control of to then give and dedicate to that, just like we would dedicate to math or literacy goals. We're to give time and professional time to do that. And so we prioritize that and offer time. it still doesn't feel like enough to a lot of our teachers. They still are pointing to time as a major factor for really, as a barrier for them to attend to this.
Mhm.
Next slide. Here it is. You want to talk through it?
Sure. So during the pilot year, so the 24-25 year, we had 17 people from the committee who had volunteered to do this, 28 chronically absent students for the pilot. So this pilot, by the time we started this, we only had from April 7th to June 3rd. So it was only 35 days. And in that time frame, 50% of the students were no longer chronically absent during the pilot. So we then presented that information at the end of the year. And then we also presented it again at the start of this year. And that's what helped us. I mean, for us to have 50% of a change in that small amount of time, we felt like that was pretty strong evidence that this could be effective. So then this year we decided to make this a pilot school-wide, knowing that we were going to have a lot of feedback, which was welcomed, to try to see how we shift next year to make it better. But in this time, we had 146 students, 70, how many teachers? 72?
72.
72 teachers, and 146 students were chosen. So we did a data poll, I think in March, and we found that 46% of the students saw improvement in attendance throughout the year. 9% of those 9% in addition did not have an increase, and they basically stayed the same. So over 50% at this point has shown improvement or stayed the same and not gotten worse.
Yeah, and overall, our overall chronic absentee rate has come down about 4 percentage points from last year overall. And so the other thing that we did, I think, in March is then we separately surveyed staff, and we did it anonymously to get a sense of the buy-in, how much they were actually engaging this. And it really didn't surprise us at all. Like I had previously reported at a regional principals meeting, like when I presented this to them, I was like, I think we're still at 50-50 in terms of the buy-in and actually doing that. And it's almost exactly what surfaced. Like, I think we were at the high 40 percentile where people felt like, yeah, this is working. And I saw some positive impacts on students. And then we saw about 17 faculty be like, yeah, I'm pretty much not doing this still. And also the 50% saying, I'm not sure it's working, or I don't think it's working. And so following up, I was able to stand in front of them, like, you can anecdotally feel something. And there's a lot of questions about correlation that I'll come back to. But having 2 snapshots of that type of positive gain, we're not talking about a 10% increase. We're talking 50% is a pretty big number. So the fact that we're still not all in on it still feels like we need to make some adaptations based on the teacher feedback, because we don't want to burn them out. We don't want to lose them on this. We still want to keep it workable. And so just again, how do we support with time, strategies, and mechanisms? Because fidelity across the board when it comes to cell phones and other things is an issue for us, and I'm sure others. And so how do we get at that fidelity piece with this and other things? And so we're thinking about that now.
And just so with the 46% and then 9%, even though they still may be chronically absent, it's just saying that their numbers had gone down, like they had been coming to school more since we started the pilot, essentially.
Go to the next slide.
So this is something that we run. So in talking about intentional engagement and just trying to find ways to be supportive to families as well, we started the No Hungry Weekends program district-wide, which we had we were benefit of a private donor who helped us get this launched last year, and we're able to maintain it at least for the next 5 years, and then hopefully, we'll have the ability to continue. But so it's district-wide, and so what we do is the school support teams can make referrals to this program. And so we have, once a referral comes in, then we fill these backpacks up with a bunch of like food that can sustain families through the week. So it involves stuff like meat, milk, dairy, vegetables, just anything that can help make a pretty substantial meal so that we know that some of these families have food for the weekend. it's pretty cool because we can this helps with collaboration with families. The hope is to see that they'll definitely come into school on Fridays for their food bags. We survey the families frequently. We send letters home in multiple languages, and at this point we've advanced to sending home recipes for families to try out. So this has been very successful, and we have, at this point, we're at 49 backpacks. So we deliver them to the schools, and then the kids take the backpacks home with them. Because one of the barriers that we realize is that not everybody can access a food shelf because some people don't have transportation. So we decided to get the food out to them through these bags. And then here at the high school, we have it's called the Fresh Rescue Program that we do through the food bank. We get food from Shaw's that's about to go bad or like expire. And every Thursday I bring it over, and we at first just set up a table that looked like, so we have a table and a fridge in the hallway. And basically at this point, all of the staff and the students know that Thursday afternoon food's coming, and we put it all out on the table. And basically, we did a lot of work with the school about, it's not if you need food, it's if you want the food. Everybody can take it. So we opened this up to like staff, everybody in the building, essentially. And we've seen such success with this. Like, it doesn't matter how many hundreds of pounds of food I bring over, it's always gone by the end of the day on Friday. So this was something that we really wanted to try to reduce food stigma. And so, like our athletic director goes, the teachers go and get food, the athletes, you see all walks of kids come and access this. So it's pretty cool.
Chelsea and Andrew, we're seeing some questions come in the chat about funding for this. I know you mentioned philanthropy has supported No Hungry Weekends. Can you just talk a little bit more about the funding and even maybe how you began some of those discussions with these partners?
Well, we were lucky. It was one person specifically who had children in the district who really wanted to help out. And I run the donation process for the district. So we do gift card drives that come in. And so this person came and said, hey, what else can I do? Really, this person basically said that she wanted to do more. And I had this in mind for the No Hungry Weekends program of a backpack program. And I had applied for a few grants. And one of the things that the person who was doing the grant said was, I recommend you partner with the food bank or your local food shelf so that you can be under their umbrella as a nonprofit. So that's really how this started. And so because of that, we have access to be able to use the food bank in Barry once a month if we want to. So we, from time to time, will order from that to save money. But ideally, we'd like to get to a place where we're putting this out more in the community and asking for donations to more than just one person. But we're not there yet because we're also trying to keep the privacy of families that receive these bags. So
yeah, there's some nice comments in the chat. I think others who have approached this. I love the local Rotary Club. Some folks talking about working with
Veggie Van Gogh is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, Veggie Van Gogh, supermarkets. That's terrific. Great job.
Yep.
Okay, back to you. 10 minutes left, guys. Just doing a quick time
next
check.
slide, please. I'll be quick.
All right, so let's go into the messaging. And Cassandra, your question about any trends in staff attendance rates. There have been schools that have done that, and they have seen that when staff are frequently absent, the kids are often absent because they know what it's like to work under a substitute, and or there's concerns or whatever. So we have seen connections there. And some schools have done like a gentle incentive for like by grade, and sometimes the grades are there's a grade competition against teachers all at the school. So it's kind of like who has a higher percentage rate of attendance. So there's lots of different ways to do it, but it is a discussion for people to have. I'm just going to go through the tier 1 messaging really quickly. Next slide. And I can get to Craig's comment in just a minute. But just in terms of the Ad Council did a huge research. I think it was like over 5 or 10,000 families. And they really looked at what were some of the key messaging that was important for families, and that it needed to be positive in tone, So we need to think about that when we think about our letters and our communication. Communicate positive opportunities associated with the in-person learning, not the consequences of missing school. Focus on what they're learning, focus on the whole child, personally, socially, academically, and emotionally. I can concur with that. I've done a number of focus groups with families, and some families say, yes, I'm concerned about my kids' academics, and some have said, no, it's the behaviors and it's the anxiety that my child feels. And so we realized when these families were talking about the anxiety and the behaviors that we had been communicating to them about academics when that wasn't exactly what they were thinking about for their child at that moment. So I think it's really looking at those all needs, acknowledge parents' hesitations without shaming, and message is first delivered by the child's teacher, the person who's most closest to the child. We've seen that over the decades that teachers play a very, very important role. Next slide. So when we're talking about communication, and Todd Rogers, and we're working with researchers at Attendance Works, and Todd Rogers from the Harvard University has done a lot of work on this. And what he's found is fewer words, although we have a lot to share, and I always have a lot and wordy sentences, but I have to eliminate them and make it simple, easy to read, skimmable, bullets, the way we like to read things, when you're really busy, and making sure that it's routinized and timely and available in the family's native language is all really important. Next slide. And here are just some examples of letters and texts that can be sent. I'm writing to check in and offer support. Heidi has missed 10 days of school this year. Is this correct? Let's start that dialogue. Because if I'm incorrect, let's have that conversation. Who they can contact. Maybe it's somebody, it's the principal, but maybe it's somebody who they have a connection with. Maybe you're calling them. Or we've missed the student in school today. This is a text. We love when they're here and engage with friends. The other thing that's really important is think about at the start of next year, how can we send positive messages to families about the students? The students love those messages. Could be just a postcard with a simple line in it. It could be a text, whatever it is, just a way to communicate to families that this is important. In high school, you have a lot of teachers. It could be just the advisor that says, I heard the student is doing well in this area. Positive messages are good. And I just need to put this one plug in. A positive message is not a positive, negative, positive message. That's what my kids would call a sandwich. That's a positive, negative, positive sandwich call. That is not a positive call. Sometimes, although we want to talk about attendance, we need to make just a positive call. And for a lot of families, they've never received a positive call about their kids. So this is a really important message. Next slide.
So one of the things that we do in our district is the universal notifications. And so we can go over this quickly, but so this, before we could do anything, we had to redo our coding to make sure that we were all coding the same in every building. And that we weren't duplicating codes and stuff. Then we met with the registrars, we worked with IT, and then we talked about this to teachers about what chronic absenteeism was and what was going to be going out district-wide. So the monthly attendance notifications go out to every caregiver or every caregiver that has a student in the district. So basically it's a snapshot once a month of how many absences their student has had and how many lates and tardies. So it's basically a snapshot of the amount of missed learning that they've had collectively as the months go on. And so after that part goes, so it's all in one big thing, but so it's the numbers of missed learning, and then we always attach up either something like a podcast, an article on routine setting, any kind of resource that we can think of that would be helpful to the families. One time we sent information about something that was going on at one of the pediatrician's office on children with anxiety, and we attached the Zoom link so that they could participate in that if they wanted to. So we always try to find something that would be helpful to the community. Next slide, please. So here is what this looks like. We have done this this is our second year doing it. So basically, this is an example from Union Memorial. So in the beginning, it just says it's an automated message, and then you'll see that that's where they have yeah, right there is where it says their attendance, the missed learning, and then there's the monthly resource. So this has been pretty helpful because it's not, this sort of helps families see the amount of missed learning, but also it helps for when it's time, or if it's time to reach out to the family, they've already seen kind of where things are at, and so it helps with the conversations. Next slide, yeah.
So if we can go into the key takeaways is to shift to that problem solving about pilot a foundational strategy, review attendance data, or look at the trusting adult and success mentor. Next slide. So we can look at your questions, but I want to take a moment, and if you can put in the chat one action you can take to support students to connect with school and promote attending school every day. And I added something in about the half days can be a challenge, but that some schools have created a spirit half day or a whole school or whole class event so that you can, so it's not something you want to miss. And I will just share recently that there was right before school vacation, a school that I've been working with, they initially just focused all on Tier 3, didn't see a change in their chronic absentee rate. So over the past year, they have been more positive. They've had meetings, they've looked at their data, and the week before vacation, they instituted a spirit week with fun things, and they never had so many kids attend the week before vacation as they did that year, this year. So there's lots of things you can do that build school community and that sense of belonging. But I know also that Heidi would like you to, your exit ticket is that evaluation. So we'd love to hear from you. Also love to hear what you're doing. And these are resources. The Attendance Works website, there's lots of resources on the website, lots of free tools. I just, we added just a couple of things, but you could look through. And people are looking for the recording. So where would you, and you can also contact Andrew, Chelsea, or myself.
Yeah, so I'll take it from here, Susan. Thank you all so much for coming. Great discussion, Susan, Chelsea, Andrew. We have so much to learn from you. I hope folks will join future sessions in this series. And the reason the PowerPoint and the recordings will all be up on our website, the reason they're not up yet is because our single web administrator who works on my team has been unexpectedly out of the office. We all know how those things go. So both, again, the PowerPoint and recordings from last session and this session will be up on our website. We'll be sure to continue to get that out. The website is linked here, and our Everyday Counts team's email address is everydaycounts@med.uvm.edu. We'd love to hear from you, hear your ideas, hear what else you want to learn about. And again, welcome folks to complete the exit ticket too, so we can get your feedback on this individual session. And I think with that, we will let you all go about your day. Thank you again so much, Susan, Chelsea, and Andrew, and look forward to engaging more with everybody again soon. Take care.